as the Secretary of State said weeks ago, the timeline we were looking at to see that serious movement was weeks. And days ago, the timeline was days, that these are critical days to see that movement.
I wonder if you can clear up some confusion for us, please, Mr. Pigott, because Tammy Bruce, who you know very well, she said yesterday, we will no longer fly around the world as mediators in meetings, and changing the methodology of how we, the US, contribute to the talks over Ukraine. Can you explain what that means exactly?
Look, what it means is that the United States has had huge amounts of engagement in terms of these talks, trying to get to this ceasefire and then a long-term peace. But as the Secretary said, we're not going to have meetings just for the sake of meetings. And that really is the point here. We're not going to have meetings that don't lead to positive outcomes or steps forward. So that's really the focus here. So we've seen President Trump and Secretary Rubio both say these next few days are very critical. This next week or so is very critical to see if we're seeing that progress towards peace. But really, the focus there is just that we're not going to fly around if the meetings are just about scheduling meetings in the future. And that's really what the point of that was.
Can I just clarify then, will you still mediate meetings between the various sides, or are you saying that is it, no more mediation?
Look, it's not about drawing that line at this point. President Trump and Secretary Rubio have been very clear that these next few days are very critical. But again, when we're looking at scheduling meetings, taking part in meetings, we're only going to be doing that. We're going to be doing that when we're going to have positive and constructive outcomes. We're going to have that dialogue. So I think it would be incorrect to kind of, as you kind of presented there, have that, red line, if you will, or have that line saying no more. But as Secretary Rubio and President Trump have said, these next few days are very critical. And if there's going to be production, if there's going to be productive talks, if there's going to be constructive dialogue and steps and initiatives or sort of goals that come out of these meetings, and then that's one thing. But we're not going to have meetings just to schedule additional meetings.
It sounds as if you are putting a timetable, though, for some sort of resolution to this issue. And if you don't get a resolution within the next few days or whatever your timetable is, then the United States would be willing to walk away.
Well, I think walk away in terms of how we're defining that, I think is very important. What we're going to see, again, is not flying to have meetings for the sake of meetings. But if there's ever a time, and as Secretary Rubio said yesterday, where we're seeing that movement, there's that serious movement towards peace, where we're having that benefit of having people come together, the United States stands ready to achieve peace. The United States and President Trump have made clear they want to see this conflict come to an end. And that remains the same. We just saw this critical minerals deal with Ukraine that was tremendously important in terms of the long-term economic partnership, the long-term economic mutual interest that we're seeing. So if there's a movement towards peace, we want to see that movement over the next few days. But really the focus here is just we're not going to have meetings for the sake of meetings. What we're going to do instead is want to see that movement towards peace, that serious movement towards peace, and we stand ready to aid in that peace at the appropriate time.
Does it mean taking a tougher line on Russia?
Well, what I think it means is making sure that we're pursuing things like the critical minerals deal, for example. I mean, that shows.
But what about new sanctions on Russia? Is Washington getting increasingly frustrated with the Kremlin? It certainly sounds like it. But what action are you putting behind those words?
Look, President Trump has been clear we need to see those actions. I'm not going to get ahead or preview decisions by the president. In terms, again, using your word of walk away there, that does not mean walking away from current sanctions. It definitely does not mean that. I'm not going to preview, again, sanctions or additional actions from the president. That's up to the president of the United States. But again, it does mean pursuing things like that critical minerals deal, which is really a first of its kind historic deal where we're seeing that economic partnership. And again, 50% of that deal being set aside, the profits from that deal being set aside for future reconstruction projects in Ukraine that would benefit both the people of Ukraine and the United States.
It's certainly something that Ukraine have said that they are happy with in terms of the share, the 50-50 equality of that deal as they see it. But what about security guarantees? Is there a way that you can let us know now if there will be some sort of military support and reassurance for businesses that want to go out and start to dig in Ukraine?
Look, it's way too early to talk about security guarantees when we're talking about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Again, we need to see that ceasefire, and then when we're talking about long-term security, there will be discussions about how to get there. I can't preview what those would be now, but it is clear, it's a clear message to the entire world that the United States has interest in Ukraine. That is a clear, unmistakable message. And the White House itself was talking about this when announcing the deal, that the United States is involved in Ukraine, has interests in Ukraine, and that this partnership, again, shows that long-term economic partnership, that long-term economic mutual interest that we're going to be pursuing.
And if American businesses want to go out there and start to get involved in Ukraine, they'd like to feel pretty sure that President Putin wasn't going to launch any more attacks on Ukraine. Will you get those sorts of guarantees before you start to put shovels in the earth?
Well, look, again, this deal is about economic partnerships. It's about setting up that investment fund, that reconstruction investment fund. It's too premature, and I have nothing to preview here when it comes to security guarantees or anything of that like. But what this deal is focused on, again, is that mutual economic partnership.
Okay, well, and that is going along. Just one more on the timing of this crisis in Ukraine. We know that J.D. Vance, the U.S. Vice President, has said that the war will not end anytime soon. Can you give us some sort of timescale? Because obviously so many people are being slaughtered in Ukraine. Innocent people are losing their lives. The firing is still continuing. When will it end?
Well, that point just there is why the president, Secretary Rubio, have been so focused on ending this conflict, on saving lives, on trying to make sure that people that are alive today are alive tomorrow, ending this conflict, ending the bloodshed. That is why we have seen this commitment from the president, from Secretary Rubio. Again, the president has been optimistic that we can get to a point where there's a ceasefire, that we can get to that point, that we can see the parties moving towards each other with serious proposals to get there. I can't preview on when that may happen, but as the Secretary of State said weeks ago, the timeline we were looking at to see that serious movement was weeks. And days ago, the timeline was days, that these are critical days to see that movement. So there's no timeline beyond that, but we are dedicated. We want to see the violence stop. That's why there's been so much engagement from this administration. We need to see that serious movement for peace from the parties. We hope to see it. The president himself has said he's optimistic that we can get there.
Okay, just moving away from that and looking at something that the UK government is very involved with, which is trying to get talks going and continuing to set up some sort of trade deal between the UK and the United States. We know that the UK wants it, but at the same time, it's looking at deals with the EU and has a pragmatic approach to China, because Chinese investment is regarded as good for growth in the UK. What do you think is the likelihood of a UK-US trade deal anytime soon?
Well, look, our partnership between our countries is a very long one. It's a historic one. We have that special relationship, to use the famous phrase, between the United States and the United Kingdom. President Trump has been clear he wants to see trade deals. That's been the point of his trade policy, to get that fairness, that reciprocity, to put the American worker first. But as he's often said, every country is pursuing their national interests. And what it's about is making sure that when we have that common interest, when we have opportunities for mutual prosperity, we pursue those opportunities. And President Trump is a deal maker. He is the best deal maker we've ever had as president. So he is out there. We've already seen so many countries come to the table when it comes to trade deals. And the United States is a great market to do business in. We are open for business. We want to see investment in our country.
So what about a deal with the UK then?
Well, I mean, there's nothing to preview or announce at this point, but as I just said, President Trump wants to see deals signed. And that's an important part of what this trade policy has been: fairness, reciprocity, getting people to the table and getting trade deals done.
How do you respond to news this morning that a spokesman for China's Ministry of Commerce suggested that Beijing was assessing the possibility of tariff negotiations with the United States? Would that provide an elegant way, if I can put it, for both sides to climb down over this?
Well, look, there's been a series and very long pattern of unfair trade practices from the Chinese Communist Party, which of course are trade barriers, but then also non-monetary trade barriers, including intellectual property, including forced partnerships. I mean, the list goes on and on and on when it comes to the unfair practices of the Chinese Communist Party. The Secretary, President Trump, have again signaled, even the last administration, that they want to solve these issues. So if there's that movement, then there's that movement. But this is a long history from the Chinese Communist Party of unfair trade practices. We need to see those unfair trade practices be addressed. That's an important part of this. So if they want to have those discussions, President Trump, Secretary Rubio, again, have said we want to see those end, but we need to see those end. And there's been a very long history from the Chinese Communist Party of those unfair trade practices, not just against the United States, but also against the United Kingdom and so many other countries around the world. So we need to see those unfair trade practices come to an end.
Your boss, Marco Rubio, is going to be a very busy man, isn't he? Because he's taking on the national security role as well from Mike Waltz. Just one quick final question. There is a very good friend of Donald Trump, and he's called Nigel Farage, and he leads the Reform UK party here in the UK, and he's been enjoying a very good night in local elections that have been taking place. Any message for him?
Well, look, I'm the State Department spokesperson. I'm going to keep on being that spokesperson here. I'm not going to comment on the internal elections in other countries. But again, we have that special relationship with the United Kingdom. We look forward to continuing to build on that.
Do you think Donald Trump will be pleased to hear the results?
Again, I'm going to let the president on this speak for himself. As the State Department spokesperson, I don't want to get into election results in other countries at this point. But again, we have that relationship with the United Kingdom, and we look forward to building on it.
Tommy Pigott, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.